In this module, we'll be doing a brief overview of assessments and how they can be used to develop your IEPs, identify goals, and plan instruction. Generally, assessments are already built into the educational programs of students at the secondary level. For example, in all public school settings, there's a required state test. In the state of Virginia, it's your Standards of Learning end of course test at the high school level. Students are required to take and pass these tests to earn verified credits, which in turn allow a student to earn a regular diploma. Related to the end of course test, most districts have benchmark testing, which is basically a test that is given to monitor students' progress towards the mastery of the content of that end of course test. Still yet, most high school courses have additional exams and tests along the way that allow the teachers to determine if the student has mastered the content of the course. These tests should be developed with the special education teacher and the general ed teacher working together in a co-teaching setting. In addition, all good instruction should include formative assessments, and these are just those on-the-spot checks that you do during your instruction to ensure that students are following your instruction and grasping concepts. And when you discover that they are not, it allows you to reteach or to change your teaching in order to meet the needs of all students. Still yet, after all these assessments, students with IEPs will have additional required assessments. For example, students who are of transition age have to have an age-appropriate transition assessment at every IEP or included in every IEP. From this assessment, the post-secondary goals are established and the transition goals. Also, students may require additional testing in specific deficit areas, such as social skills for students who have autism, or communication assessments for students with communication needs. In addition, students with self-care or independent living deficits may require adaptive ratings. Basically, it is very important when you're developing an IEP that you have appropriate tests for all areas of deficits that may be impacting a student's learning. All students are required to participate in state testing. For high school students, the state test is the Standards of Learning end of course test. 1% of the tested population may participate in the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program if they meet the criteria. This test is reserved for students with significant cognitive impairments who require a modified curriculum. Students with IEPs may have accommodations on their end of course SOL test, and there are alternative tests for specific tests. Also, students may be eligible for modified credit accommodations, which means that they may be able to get a verified credit for a score that is somewhat lower than the required pass score as long as they meet the guidelines or the criteria. Of course, the impacts of state testing are obvious. Our instruction must be focused on mastery of SOLs, for this is what will help our students to earn a regular diploma, which opens up more job opportunities as well as more opportunities for education beyond high school. Our IEP goals should be linked directly to SOL skills or those skills that are related to SOL standards. And we should always look at fair and appropriate accommodations for testing, which will help our students to access the test. Remember, the test accommodation should not give students an unfair advantage, but simply level the playing field so that they are able to show what they know in the content area. The advantage of SOL testing at the high school level for all students is that it keeps expectations high for our students with disabilities. At the high school level, the only required district test is usually the benchmark test. However, some districts may require additional testing, which would be helpful to you as a special education teacher in terms of learning more about your students. Benchmark testing can be helpful in helping to identify targets for remediation, and it can also allow opportunities to practice different accommodations and evaluate their helpfulness. Most high school courses include a variety of tests or assignments that will lead to the student's grade for that course. Students should have accommodations similar to the ones that they will have on the end of course testing throughout the course, and especially on major tests. Major tests can be used to measure progress towards students' IEP goals, especially if the special education teacher and gen ed teacher have worked together to develop the test. They can also be used to determine targets for remediation. Testing methods may be modified for students who have significant disabilities, and this should be addressed in the IEP. Although no one is crazy about a lot of testing, it can have some benefits. Testing throughout the semester can help students to prepare for taking tests. This can help our students as they prepare for educational settings beyond high school. They can also be used to measure students' progress and to determine specific goals. The assessment that may have the most impact on student performance is the formative assessment. This is those assessments that we do as we're teaching, where we stop and have students to summarize what we've said, or answer a few quick questions, or give an example, or perform a task that we've asked them to do. These are very important, especially for our students who may sometimes not know the right questions to ask or may not be effective at getting the assistance they need. So it's very, very important for us to check for understanding frequently. Formative assessments are a crucial part of explicit instruction. These are the checks for understanding that you build into your teaching. It's very important to know if your students are grasping concepts, or if they need a little more time on something, or maybe even they need to back up and work on some prerequisite skills, or you may even want to speed up instruction if you see that students are grasping concepts quickly. A good teacher is constantly assessing how their students are doing during instruction. It also provides immediate feedback to the student and prevents repeated errors. We'll talk more about explicit instruction and formative assessments in later modules. All parts of the IEP should be based on the present level of performance. Therefore, if the present level of performance does not include current and thorough information regarding the student's abilities, weaknesses, and needs, then it is impossible to write an appropriate IEP. That is why assessments are such an important part of preparing to write an IEP. It is essential that you have a good understanding of the student's needs in all academic areas that are impacted by their disability. In addition, it is important that you have information regarding other deficit areas such as behavior, social skills, adaptive skills. Without thorough testing and assessments, it is impossible to adequately develop the IEP. One thing to remember about assessments: always look at what's already available to you before you do additional assessments. There's no need to overdo or to redo. If there's already assessments available that are a part of that student's regular program, use those whenever possible. When you do decide to do additional assessments, make sure that they're giving you information that is meaningful and relevant and that can be used for developing IEP goals. Don't be afraid to use informal curriculum-based assessments. These are especially helpful for math courses that may have very specific information that the student's going to be required to know. Therefore, you develop a test that fits right with that course, and that gives you good goals to target on your IEP. Always think about your data collection when you are determining your assessments. What am I going to find out from this assessment, and how can I write a goal and collect data to monitor progress on that goal? If you're developing an IEP for a student who has a reading disability, it's very important that that IEP includes objective data regarding that student's current reading levels. There's several ways you can collect that data. Below are just a few. You may choose a standardized reading assessment such as the Wyatt, the Woodcock-Johnson, or the Kaufman, or you may go with an informal reading inventory such as the Ekwall-Shanker reading inventory or the qualitative reading inventory. You may also do an informal assessment such as have the student read from a certain grade level passage so many words in a specific amount of time to test for fluency, and then record or collect data on specific errors that you observe. Any one of these options are acceptable, but just remember your purpose. Your purpose is to determine where that student is so that you can plan the rest of the IEP to meet that student's needs. And also your purpose is to measure progress, so you want a system of collecting data that will allow you to continue to collect data as you provide instruction to make sure that your instruction is effective. Again, there are actual assessments of written language out there that we may use to measure a student's writing abilities. However, what is most helpful for planning IEPs is usually just a good analysis of a sample of a student's writing. This can be, depending on the student and their age and level, it can be a simple paragraph or an essay. Either way, I would recommend using a rubric to analyze that writing that you can use again later as you're measuring progress on specific goals. There are a number of standardized math tests that may be used to assess a student's ability in the area of math. However, personally, I think the curriculum-based assessments are the most helpful when you're planning instruction for students in this area. It's best to have an assessment that's based on what that student is supposed to master in math in that upcoming year. And if you work closely with the content area teacher using the guidelines of the standards of learning for that grade level, it is easy to come up with a good solid curriculum-based assessment that can give you very practical information that will assist you in your IEP goal planning. It's important to remember that assessment does not end with the IEP development. It's an ongoing process. We should be continuously collecting data on our students' progress towards each and every goal in their IEP. This may be through observation, it could be through formal written tests, it can be through informal tests, it can be through ratings or projects. It doesn't really matter how, as long as that assessment gives you clear evidence of the level of mastery that you have written into your goal. That's why I always tell teachers, whenever you're writing goals, always think of how you're going to assess that goal, and it'll make it much easier for you in the long run. As we mentioned before, sometimes there are assessments that are required that are not academic assessments. For our students with autism, we should do some social skills ratings to make sure we're addressing this area for these students. Our students with intellectual disabilities or emotional disabilities, we may need to look at their adaptive skills, do some ratings there, and track that progress as well. For our students transitioning, we are constantly looking at interest inventories, vocational assessments, and other transition assessments that may give us more information that will help that student prepare for life after their high school experience. One last word about assessments and IEPs. Any assessment score that is listed in an IEP must include an explanation of what the test measures and what the score means. For example, if you list an SOL score, you must explain what the SOL is. You can do this briefly, and then add what the score means in terms of whether it's failing, passing, or advanced. This is true for any assessment score that you list in an IEP. Just keep in mind in writing your IEPs that they should be written in such a way that anyone who picked that IEP up would understand that student's strengths, weaknesses, and needs. In other words, you should use wording that is understandable by the lay person, especially by the parent.